Bonjour tout le monde. Bonjour. Bonjour à tous. Merci d'être parmi nous ce soir. Bienvenue à Art Speaks. Je m'appelle Paul Féodor et je suis coordinateur pour Art Speaks. Merci. So just before proceeding with tonight's talk, Art Speaks wishes to acknowledge that we are located on the unceded lands of the Kanien'kehá:ka people. Tiohtià:ke, aussi appelé Muniang en Anishinaabe-Moan, est un endroit de rassemblement et d'échange pour plusieurs Premières Nations depuis des milliers d'années. Aujourd'hui, cette terre accueille une population diverse de peuples autochtones et d'autres personnes. Nous reconnaissons les Kanien'kehá:ka en tant que les gardiens et gardiennes traditionnels des eaux et des terres sur lesquelles nous nous réunissons ce soir. Art Speaks respects the continued connections between the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples. We recognize our position as settlers on this land, and we're grateful to be gathered here today. Welcome back to Art Speaks. We're thrilled to welcome you back after almost a year away from the stage. There's still a lot more to come from Art Speaks, so make sure to sign up for our newsletter. You can also follow us on Instagram. We're artspeaks_MTL, and we only send out invitations on our newsletter, so we're not going to spam you with too much. We want you to stay informed because we want to share this with as many people as possible. Juste un petit mot aussi, vous remarquez sans doute que ce n'est pas Mojane qui vous souhaite la bienvenue aujourd'hui. Notre cher Mojane est maintenant avec le Musée d'art contemporain en tant que commissaire. Alors, je voulais juste dire merci Mojane pour tout ce que tu as fait pour Art Speaks. Et puis merci aussi pour tout ce que tu continues à faire pour la communauté de l'art ici à Tiohtià:ke, Muniang, Montréal. On te souhaite tout le succès au monde. Alors donc, avant de céder la place à Lillian Maurer, qui va introduire les conférenciers, donc Steve Locke et LaToya Ruby Frazier, je tiens à vous partager aussi que la librairie du CCA est avec nous aujourd'hui, donc merci à la librairie du CCA. Ils ont une sélection de livres qui ont été créés et qui sont référencés par nos conférenciers, donc allez voir la table aussi après, si vous ne l'avez pas déjà fait d'ailleurs. Feel free to also take photos during the talk tonight, and please tag us on Instagram if you'd like. Please make sure also that all your devices are on silent mode as well throughout the talk. And at the end of the talk, there will be a 30-minute question period. We'll be bringing microphones up and down the aisles so we can give them to you and you can ask your questions. And please keep your questions short and sweet so that everyone can have a maximum of time to engage with our speakers. So now to introduce LaToya Ruby Frazier and Steve Locke, please welcome Lillian Maurer.
Thank you, Paul. So welcome back. It's been a year, and we're so happy to be here with you again, and heartening to see a full house like this. To introduce LaToya Ruby Frazier and Steve Locke. Before introducing our speakers, I just want to take a moment to thank Paul for his work at Art Speaks and for attending to every detail to make this a seamless evening. And I'm also very proud and delighted that Leslie Johnston, a beloved figure in Montreal, has joined us at Art Speaks. Not only is Leslie deeply experienced in museum work and in programming, but she's also a friend, and I'm delighted to work with her to continue to make strong programs. So both LaToya and Steve work at the nexus of social justice. In different ways, they both focus our attention on the unseen or the marginalized, and they give them voice and autonomy. LaToya is one of the most important artists working today. She just completed a groundbreaking, immersive, and mid-career exhibition at MoMA that focused on 7 of her projects. LaToya is a social activist who takes race, class, and gender viewed through the intimate lens of family, community as her focus. LaToya was recently named to the Times list of the 100 most influential people of 2024. It's pretty amazing. Lynn Nottage, the Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright, wrote in praise of LaToya, and I quote, "She is an activist, a healer, and an artist. Her work captures the anxiety, the beauty, and the reality of people negotiating the complexities of life on the brink. She creates searing portraits that reflect care and intimacy. LaToya's images pierce our complacency and demand that we pay attention to the world around us with intention and compassion." Steve is a multidisciplinary artist whose work spans painting, drawing, sculpture, and installation. He has a beautifully reviewed exhibition at MASS MoCA now for the next year, so try to go. It's wonderful. The show is a meditation on uniquely American forms of violence directed at Black and queer people. He engages issues of identity, desire, race, violence, and memory, revealing as much tenderness and humor as he does brutality. Steve asks that you take notice. Noticing is all it takes. In reviewing the show, Murray White of the Boston Globe said that it made for one of the most powerfully affecting art experiences that he's ever had. So let's hear from LaToya and Steve now. We're in for a treat.
Hello.
Hello.
Good evening.
It's been a minute since I've seen you.
Yes,
You look amazing. I
It
just want
has
you to know
been.
you look amazing. And
Thank you.
I saw the MoMA show. It was incredible.
Thank you.
And I have absolutely no right to say this to you right now, but I'm so proud of you. I just am so, you know, like we go back. We go way, way back
Yeah,
to
you-
2008, right?
2007.
2007,
Yeah,
oh
that's
my
when I
God.
finished my master's at Syracuse and came to Skowhegan.
And I was saying this to Lillian the other day. When you work in that job at Skowhegan, you see a lot of artists. I was the dean, so I was essentially like the chief camp counselor, and you see a lot of artists come through, and you think, oh well, you know that one is okay, and that one is great. And like when we met you and we did the first studio visits with you, Linda Earle, the director, and I were like, she's really something. Like she's not messing around. Like it was that evident that early on in your career. Like I've never told you that, but and Linda's never told you that, but like we knew at the beginning. So everything it was ordained. So
Well, thank you, Steve.
Yeah.
And you're also looking dapper and handsome.
oh, thank you.
And
I'm all moisturized and everything.
your show at MASS MoCA really moved me in many ways. And, you know, like Steve is saying, he was the dean at Skowhegan when I met him in 2007. I was in my 20s. I've had a lot going on, definitely didn't suffer any fools, and was very intensely engaged with my work and all of my peers at that residency. But we've never had the opportunity to really sit down and talk to each other about our work and our practice. And so I'm just really grateful to have this opportunity and time with you, especially at such an urgent, tumultuous time that we're facing in the U.S.
Right.
And also how, in some ways, even though it's painful what we're witnessing happen in the U.S., it really does underscore the significance of Steve's show at MASS MoCA and why this kind of artwork is essential and important, and why the art world and patrons and collectors and curators and historians and other contemporary artists should be looking to people like Steve. That's really challenging the discourse, the medium, the content, how it could be used, not only in an art historical context, but actually in a real way in the world. And so I'm just delighted to have this chance to really know you in this intimate way as a fellow artist that is deeply engaged with the real essence and spiritual work of James Baldwin.
Oh, thank you, my love. And thank you, Lillian, for bringing us together. I really do appreciate that. You know, she's very busy. I'm very busy. And it's organizations like this that actually take the time to consider artists in dialogue, not just me standing up here clicking slides talking about my work, but us in dialogue. And that I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, and it would have never happened in the U.S.
Right.
So truly, thank you for bringing us together here in Montreal. And it's funny that it takes us to leave the U.S. to be able to sit here and dialogue for all of you. So I think Your hearts and minds will be moved definitely in this conversation. So yeah, let's jump in.
All right, here's the sort of muse of the past couple of years of my life. James Baldwin, American writer. This is the 100th, the centennial anniversary of his birth. His birthday was August 3rd, and this show opened on August 4th. And so it opened the day after his 100th birthday. And I started working on this show with Evan Garza, the curator at MASS MoCA. He offered me the show, and I had a completely different show planned. And what ended up happening was two very dear friends of mine passed away, so in close succession to each other, and I started to think about that thing that, the question that goes all the way back to my graduate school training, like what's at stake? Like you're gonna have an exhibition, what's at stake in this exhibition? And having an exhibition at this time in the United States, the fascism on the rise, anti-Jewish hatred, anti-queer violence, the sort of constant dehumanizing of Black Americans. That's what's happening right now. And so I could like turn inward and talk about my own angst or whatever, my own personal trauma, whatever the hell that is. I've never found that interesting. I've never found myself that interesting. So I decided to turn to this text, The Fire Next Time, which was a germinal book for me. And understanding who Baldwin was as an artist, demanding the right to be an artist, you know, demanding to be considered an artist on his own terms, and having to leave the country in order to develop a voice, and then coming back to his country and holding it to account, right? I decided I wanted that to be the sort of overarching sense of the show. And I even hesitated naming the show after the book because I felt like it could be perceived as kind of arrogant. But I just think that that text in particular in this moment is so prescient to what's happening in what you folks call the South right now, right? Because no one told, what did Malcolm X say? And you know, Baldwin was one of Malcolm X's favorite writers, right? And so this idea that someone who was in the center of the struggle for Black liberation was an artist, you know? And that is the place of the artist, to be in the center of that struggle. So that was the sort of reasoning behind my structuring the show around him. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And just so, I guess not everybody in here has experienced this exhibition. So the way I've kind of framed the questions is I'm kind of giving you a walkthrough in my descriptions to ask the questions so you kind of feel like you might have been there. So you've already kind of touched on the answer to this, but just to walk through and
See
frame
that
it.
I'm very, very smart that way. To talk about the
So now I'm placing you in MASS MoCA. So when the viewer walks through the entry doors of the exhibition, they are greeted with the most glorious, reverential graphite portrait of James Baldwin by you, entitled Portrait of James Baldwin 2024. And so you started to answer this, but I'll ask again to dig a little deeper. Who is James Baldwin to you? Like, when did you first come across his writings?
Oh, wow.
And how does he inspire your artwork and your practice? Especially because I realized in forming the questions, this is actually spiritual work as well. And so if you want to talk to that, additionally to the actual art making and the title of the exhibition. So when did you first learn about him? What was that first seminal piece that guided you?
I think it was fiction. It was a fiction book that I read. It was the short stories, Going to Meet the Man. That was the book. It was a book of Baldwin short stories. I must have been in high school, so I must have been like 13 or 14. And I read those short stories because I was, it was like an extra credit thing that we could do. Like you could read so many books, but if you read an extra book, like it would increase your test score, whatever. I don't know, some sort of weird thing, right? But and the extra credit books were all books by Black people, like they were like not in the canon, right? And so I picked James Baldwin, and I picked The Fire Next Time. No, I picked Going to Meet the Man, and it was such. And you've had this experience too, where you encounter an artwork, and you feel like this artist made that for me, right?
Yeah.
I felt like whatever he was doing, he was thinking, Steve Locke is going to need this book, like at some point when he's like starting to understand that he's not like the other boys on the playground. He's going to need this. And I remember reading that book, and then I went to the library and I took out every book I could find by James Baldwin, and I read every single one. And then I didn't know he wrote essays and nonfiction. And after that, then I got to The Fire Next Time. So it was after I had read all the fiction, If Beale Street Could Talk, Another Country, like I read them all. And I wouldn't say I was obsessed by him, but I had not heard that voice before. Mm-hmm. And it was the voice that was in my head. Like in Another Country, where he does this thing where he translates what people say in conversation. It's like, man, you can go F yourself. And what he really means is, man, I really love you, right? Mm-hmm. It's that kind of like thing that he does in the book. And it was fascinating to me. So it started with the fiction, right? With story, right? I don't think of myself as a narrative artist at all, right? But the fiction led me to the nonfiction, and the nonfiction led me to The Fire Next Time, which became a touchstone text for me. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And spiritual, what do you mean when you say spiritual?
I think that, especially because he had such a trying relationship with his Christianity and being a preacher and his faith.
Right.
And I do think that your work, especially that exhibition, that is a lot of energy. It takes a lot of tenacity, heart, spirit, courage, bravery, and it takes a lot of love, a really tough, disciplined love to want to really show people to themselves. And there's a risk that happens with that.
Yeah. I agree
And
with
the
that.
level of, I know that neither one of us like to hang around trauma and use that as a crutch, but I do think that we are internalizing a lot of these things in ways that there is a type of faith, a hope, a love, a determination that has to sustain us,
Right.
so that we are not affected and stained by these things that we dare to really look at and stare down and challenge the audiences and viewers with.
I love my tech friend here is pretending to be invisible.
Oh, you can't hear me.
Okay.
Gotcha.
So, thank you for that. Yeah.
So for me, James Baldwin is like the gospel to me in a way,
Really?
especially because the way he took on the church. I mean, in The Fire Next Time, that was a revelation to me.
Well, the majority of the book
to
is
hear
about the
him
church.
talk about his upbringing in the church that way. And so I just think that the way we're keeping his thinking, his thoughtfulness, and his influence alive for us,
Right.
that's the spiritual essence of him
I hear what you're
permeating
saying.
in the work. Not that it's faith-based, religion-based.
I hear what you're saying. I think that if I have a spiritual comparison with Baldwin, it's that he said at one point, God has a lot to answer for. He said, like, when I get to Judgment Day, you have to realize that there's 2 chairs at the mercy seat, and God has a lot to answer for, right? Mm. And that's sort of where I land. I lost my faith when my mother died. I didn't really have any use for, and I'm oddly French in that way. No gods, no kings, like nothing, right? That kind of thing. But I do think that sort of connection that comes from art is probably the most spiritual thing. And like that connection through making, which is why I think that when we think about this body of work, because this was the body of work where I first met you. And you said you were how old? You're 20-something making this
Yeah, I
work.
was in my 20s. Well, I started it as a teenager, but When I met you, I was in my 20s, like just turned 21, 22.
I
And this image came 2 years after Skowhegan. My
Right.
grandmother died 2 years after Skowhegan.
This was rough. I'll hold up the microphone. Yeah. You have to pretend you're Beyonce.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, you know it's Beyonce. It's never more than 4 inches away from her face, no matter what she's doing.
The image that you see here came 2 years after I met Steve at Skowhegan.
And this is Braddock, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sort of your ancestral seat as a citizen. It's where your family's from.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I want to speak to these. I wrote a text to read to all of you to kind of ground this work, especially if you're new to it. So if we go back to that first
Love.
image, I want to read the passage from Baldwin that's important to me. It's The Creative Process, 1962, and I'm just going to read an excerpt from it. And so as you look at me, my mother, and my grandmother, and the way that I'm looking out at you, the viewer, hear these words of Baldwin. The artist is distinguished from all the other responsible actors in society, the politicians, legislators, educators, and scientists, by the fact that he is his own test tube, his own laboratory, working according to very rigorous rules, however unstated these may be, and cannot allow any consideration to supersede his responsibility to reveal all that he can possibly discover concerning the mystery of the human being. Society must accept some things as real, but he must always know that visible reality hides a deeper one, and that all our action and achievement rest on things unseen. A society must assume that it is stable, but the artist must know, and he must let us know, that there is nothing stable under heaven. One cannot possibly build a school, teach a child, or drive a car without taking some things for granted. The artist cannot and must not take anything for granted, but must drive to the heart of every answer and expose the question the answer hides. So for me, this is the manifesto for how Baldwin teaches me how to be
This
as an
image
artist.
in particular.
Well, once I knew this particular passage, looking back at this image, it made it very clear to me the work that I had been doing. But this image had already existed before I came across this passage.
Right.
But when I think about it and I look at the 3 generations of us in this portrait, I realize that this is a responsibility, and that, you know, even when my students ask me, well, what's the role of an artist in society? This is it.
Right.
The creative process. This is the manifesto for me.
And he's not hiding it. It's not a mystery. It's not a secret. It doesn't depend upon race, class, position. It doesn't depend on anything except the willingness to be true and to remain true.
Yeah.
Right. I think that when I think about social documentary as a form, I don't think I've met a photographer who is more in love with photography than you, right? Because I think that when I look across your body of work, the way that you interact with the camera seems to be an extension, not of your eye, but of your mind. And this was the work that I saw when I first met you, and it was so powerful coming out of such a young person, but it was in no way self-involved. There was a sort of shared authorship within the work between you and your mom, and a shared sense of what's the word I'm looking for? A shared sense of consequence in the way the images were made, right? And that is something that has gone throughout your whole career, your love of photography. I can quote like 5 or 6 different photographers looking at your work, from Diane Arbus, the level of staging, seeing the apparatus of the photograph in the finished print, right? Even the way that they're printed with those like sort of soft, elegant edges that remind me of someone like Francesca Woodman or something like that. So like, it drives me crazy that no one talks about you as a master of this medium, number one. But number two, you turn this social documentary gaze on yourself and your own community and allow you, your mom, your family to document and author these images of yourself. Well, how did you make the choice to turn that on yourself as subject and author and image?
Yeah, I mean, all wonderful points that you're saying. And to answer it in short, it really was my obsession with the need to want to create a paradigm shift. So when you go to undergrad, you're confronted with the 1930s social documentary work of looking at Dorothea Lange, Walker Evans, Gordon Parks being one of the only Black people assigned to that FSA commission. And so what bothered me about seeing that work then as a teenager was when you look at Migrant Mother, right? When that was passed around in our class as an assignment for Roland Barthes' Camera Lucida, finding an image with a punctum and a studium, right? All the theory. My classmates are passing it around, and then Kathy Kowalski, my teacher, asked if we knew who the photographer was. Yeah, we knew it was Dorothea Lange. And then she asked if we knew the woman's name in the picture, and we didn't. And I remember asking, why don't we know the name of this woman and the names of her 3 children? And it was in asking that question that suddenly I wasn't looking at an image of a woman with her children hiding their faces. I saw a structure, a power structure. I immediately saw a diagram over it. And it was a triangle that seated the government and the corporation at the top, right? Franklin Delano Roosevelt as the president, Roy Stryker as the person commissioning it, working for the corporation. And then at the bottom left and right would be Dorothea Lange, who eventually had that image taken out of context and relieved of her job. And then Florence Owens Thompson, who never receives royalties, does not own the copyright, cannot contextualize that image. They die just as in need of resources when that image was created at the end of their lives. And they never control it or its circulation. And so all I've been doing for 25 years is trying to rotate, well, 1, subvert it, and then 2, rotate that paradigm so that the corporation and the government are not at the top. And what you have are the people who are depicted in the image doing the authorship, the contextualizing, speaking through the image and standing on it as a platform. So that's what's been the obsession for me, is that one burning question. What would Florence Owens Thompson's self-portrait have looked like had she photographed herself? So that is the notion of family. That was my obsession with my mother and my grandmother for 14 years, making that work with them.
But, I mean, is there another image? Yeah. But the images are all they're so different. Like, it's not like a collection of portraits. It's, and there's a certain formality to some of the photographs of you and your mom that really reminds me of, like, the Mike Disfarmer, like going into a community and photographing people and having them put on their Sunday best and they're sort of participating in imaging themselves, right? But you also get these moments. Oh, there's a baby. I love it. You can bring the baby up here if it starts to cry. But these moments that I'm assuming no one else would be able to photograph because they are not part of this unit, of this notion of family, right? There's that sort of thing that sort of pushes the work into a very, very difficult place to consume, right? It's very easy to consume that image of Florence
Owens Thompson.
Owens Thompson. It's very easy to consume that image. It's almost impossible to consume the images in the notion of family. They keep asserting themselves as authored documents of a life, of one life. It seems like it's one person with 3 heads at times.
Yes.
Yeah.
So me, my mother, and my grandmother are like an entity of time. So to me, they are all, whether they're portraits, still life, landscapes, aerial views, they're all self-portraits. And I'm talking about how the history of the landscape of Braddock has us bound in a very particular way.
Right.
So if we go back to that aerial shot, I want to read it to you so that you can hear what I'm saying and look at this image. Hovering from a bird's eye point of view, my spiritual bondage to Braddock was broken the instant light exposed my film's silver highlight crystals, creating United States Still, Mon Valley Works, Edgar Thompson Plant, 2013. Like an archaeological excavation permeating this 21st century post-industrial landscape were the vestiges of imperial war, patriarchy, death, and destruction of nature. Braddock, PA is the namesake for the British officer General Edward Braddock, who was defeated and mortally wounded at this site in the Battle of the Monongahela in 1755. George Washington, who served as Braddock's aide-de-camp, witnessed what would become the start of the imperial war between Great Britain and France, also known as the French and Indian War, 1754 to 1763. John Frazier, who aided George Washington, served in the expeditions against the French. A plaque marks where his cabin once stood at the Edgar Thompson Steelworks. On the same battlefield, 2.5 centuries later, I created a self-portrait standing inside Watts Memorial Chapel in Grandma Ruby, Mom and Me, 2009, and that's the image of us in the funeral home. It's evident to me, not only are we fighting a physical war, but a spiritual one. Even though I walk through the valley, because Braddock is known as the Monongahela Valley, the Mon Valley, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. And so in the work, what you're starting to pick up is that I am, through portrait, still life, landscapes, and aerial views, dealing with all of this history, right? I believe that the history of a place is written on the body of its inhabitants and the landscape, if you really want to know what is happening energetically in these places. So this is a serious amount of bloodshed that has happened in this town, in addition to industrial capitalists destroying the ecology of it for profit. And then what you have are bodies like my grandmother Ruby, who grew up there in the 30s when it was a melting pot and prosperous, my mother, who grew up there in the 50s during white flight and segregation, and the GI Bill allowing some people to move and forcing Black people to remain. And then myself being born there in the 1980s, in the aftermath, coming of age as a little girl in Reaganomics.
Right.
So what do you think this place feels like, right? The weight of this place. A lot of people don't think about that when they come to this town. They don't realize it's still an industrial steel town. It's Andrew Carnegie's first mill, the Edgar Thompson Steelworks. It still operates today. It's where his first free public library is. I mean, this is the center of the debate, because this is the plant that the Japanese company Nippon wants to purchase.
Right.
This is it. This is why Kamala and Biden keep bringing it up. So there's all of this history, and yet if you Googled Braddock, you would have never known that my grandmother Ruby was there, that my mother Cynthia was there, that I existed there.
Right.
So in addition to taking on the history of social documentary and changing the power dynamics, I'm also trying to contend with, well, what does it mean to be a little Black girl trying to make space for myself and my family between these two large Scotsmen like Andrew Carnegie and John Frazier?
Right.
And of course, this is the beginning of George Washington's military career.
Right.
This battlefield that is this site is what shaped American history and led to the American Revolution. So what does that mean when there's 3 generations of women that actually inherited and embody all of that history and all of that space? And then what does it mean whenever I'm visually writing us into the history, right? What it reveals about all of those other dark forces and histories of trying to erase us.
Right.
And so this is why the work is also, in some ways, historical in dealing with fighting historical erasure and amnesia and allowing people to really get justice for what they were actually trying to do to our bodies in that landscape.
And that's why the work isn't segregated. That's why everything has to be together, has to be in the same register. You have to experience the portraits the way you experience the landscapes. And I think that that was so brilliant that it came out as one body of work. And it, is this being recorded? Yeah. Every time I see, I saw the show that Opie and Weezer did that had a selection.
Grief and grievance.
Yeah. And I felt like this is so unfair to this work to have cannibalized it this way, you know? And I really admire you standing on business to say, like, it needs to be together. It needs to be a unit. And that was the great thing about the MoMA show, was to be able to see it as a unit and not see it as like sad portraits of this person or this sort of thing. The truncation of the work always gets to me.
Yeah, I don't know that he felt very favorable towards documentary photography. I mean,
Girl,
he's critiquing it by the way he's placing it in the show.
We could do a whole hour on Opie and Weezer. Okay, we could do a whole hour on that. So let's just leave that where it is because...
So the other part I want to jump in because this sets up kind of what you're dealing with the violence against our bodies and police brutality. So in an image like this, this is the Landscape of the Body series, and this is my mother receiving an epilepsy test. And in addition to Baldwin's text, I also look at someone like Mindy Thompson-Fulalove, who's a social psychiatrist, who came up with the term root shock. How many people have ever heard the term root shock? Okay, so root shock is the way that social and environmental factors affect the mental health of communities. And she says increased risk for stress-related diseases such as depression and heart attacks. So in this image here, what I'm actually doing, of course, the formal aesthetics are all there. My love for art, it's all there. My love for painting, art, it's there. But what I'm actually doing is creating this diptych with my mother receiving the epilepsy test because it's about measuring her seizures, her shakes, her tremors. And the building that she's next to is our hospital that is being gutted and torn out. And so I was trying to understand how to visualize this concept of root shock, which is about how a community literally feels like it has its lifeline and its heart ripped from them when an important building that is really like a community center and a lifeline to that community, it's taken from them.
Right.
This is our community hospital that was taken from us by UPMC, the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, that merged with us in the 90s. Our hospital was built by steelworkers and nurses. It was our only ATM machine, our only restaurant, the only place where there were programs for drug and alcohol programs. And it really was our only place of employment for a town that had only about 2,000 people left and is not even a mile long, about 3 stoplights. So this is a very small place with all of this history. But they took this from us and told us on the 11 o'clock news that they were taking it because it was underutilized and losing money, which was not true because all of us have terminal illnesses from living there with the pollution from the United States Steel Corporation.
Right.
So Mindy Fulalove's concept of root shock really stood out to me, and this diptych is a way of trying to visualize that, to give you a sense of what that feels like as we were watching and hearing the building, the hospital being torn down. And then, of course, juxtaposing that next to doctors trying to have the wires on my mother's head to try to locate and to decide if it was epilepsy. So those types of tremors from epilepsy are very similar to the way that the foundation of the town was shaking as they were continuing to bulldoze it aggressively and illegally.
Wow.
And so I believe that in addition to us being shot down by police and killed and all these different technological lynchings that occur, the other thing that my work is preoccupied with that complements yours is what Rob Nixon calls slow violence.
Right.
And so what you see through the three generations of us is how systemically, right, through spatial, structural, institutional racism, that they are literally trying to kill us off.
Right.
And so I think that that's the other part to talking about brute force violence in America and violence against Black bodies outright in front of our faces is the slow way that they're poisoning us and killing us. And so that's the part that starts to come alive when I shift to making portraits that are diptychs that are talking literally about the landscape of the body.
Well, one of the other things is like this work also functions in video and performance as well that you do. I curated a show years ago called Arcadia, which was about the landscape, and I included your piece, United States Steel, which was the video diptych of the steel plant operational, pumping smoke and ash into the air, and you on the other side of the diptych struggling to breathe, right? And I think that that kind of metaphor for Black life struggling to breathe is something that is consistent through Baldwin. And it's consistent in both of our works. And it's consistent in what people are finally starting to experience in the United States, that it's not that Black people want to have the lives of white people. It's not that Black people want to share space with white people. That's not what it is. It's that we want to not be murdered. Like that's really what the ask is, right? And that's why when people said Black Lives Matter, right? Excuse me. When people said Black Lives Matter, some people had some feelings about it because it was like, well, like everybody, like no, if everybody mattered, we wouldn't have to say this, right? And the consequence of living as a Black person in America is that you know the limits of your life. There are things that I don't do. There are places I don't go. Not because I don't deserve to go there or I don't feel like I have a right to be there. I feel like I have a right to everything in the country, right? My countrymen don't feel that way. Like, we had to pass a law to tell white people they couldn't kill Black people. Like, Black people knew that they shouldn't be killed, right? But the law wasn't for us. We had to pass a law to tell people that they couldn't do that, right? That's the country that we live in. And when we talk about the history, like the layered history on top of it, it's like a palimpsest where you always see like someone trying to erase something to put something new down. Like, let's forget about this thing that happened because this thing is really new and it's really a lot better, right? And so in my work, I'm really interested in who is telling this story? How are we telling this story about what it means to be a Black person who does not survive an encounter with the police? Because up until very recently, LaToya, if Black people got killed by the police, everybody just assumed it was their fault. They must have done something. Otherwise, why would the police lie? These are things that people would say. The police wouldn't lie. The police are there to protect us. And I'm sure that there are people who believe that, right? I've never believed that. Never for 1 second. And then when the only reason it started to shift was because people had cell phones. That is the only reason things got different, right? And when this piece is, I've done this piece a number of times, but this is sort of like the entrance to the show at MASS MoCA, where you walk into this little alcove and there's exactly what it says here. There's no poetry. There's no trying to be illusionistic about it. Like, this is what it is. It's a partial list of unarmed African Americans who were killed by police or who died in police custody during my sabbatical from Massachusetts College of Art and Design, right? And it's between 1 year, right? It's 1 year of time. It's from August 1st, 2014 to August 31st, 2015. So it's 13 months when I wasn't working. And during that time, so many people were like, "You're on sabbatical. It's so great. What's going on? Like, are you getting some rest? Are you reading a lot of books?" And I'm watching Michael Brown on the ground in Ferguson, Missouri. I'm seeing Eric Garner strangled on television, watching Tamir Rice be killed in a drive-by by a police officer, right? That's what's happening. And, you know, James Baldwin says, "I can't believe what you say because I see what you do," right? You know what's going on. You know. But you think because they're not white, it has nothing to do with you. That's the problem, right? What did Toni Morrison say? Like, I can't find a group of black women, high or low, who would attack a child who had done nothing to them. But you had white women in the United States setting fire to buses with black children on them, right? So, like, you can't tell me that, and we don't want to talk about that in the United States. It's fine now. Like, we elected Obama, it's fine. Like, everything's cool, right? But the fact remains is that, like, there are 262 names on this wall. And this is a partial list because I couldn't figure out all of them. Because when I did this project, no one kept track of police shootings. Like, the police were not charged to keep track of how many people they shot or the circumstances of when they were killed. I had to crowdsource this. I went to The Guardian in the UK because they kept a sort of running list that they were trying to do. There's crowdsourcing work by killedbypolice.net, and they had a list. And so I had to figure out, cobble together, like, who was killed, who was armed, who wasn't armed, what were the circumstances. And that's how I got it down to 262 names. There were many, many, many more people, black and white, who were killed by police during this time.
Yeah, I remember because I came back as faculty at Skowhegan in 2015.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know if they have it up anymore, but I think it was Rakia Boyd. I definitely, some of the names that are here on your list.
Mm-hmm.
It's when Dylan Roof, that was 2015.
Yeah, it was.
When he went into the church in Charleston and shot it up, I was at Skowhegan. And to come out of the cabin at Skowhegan and to be expected to perform and do studio visits.
Right.
And I'm looking at the other participants, like, I couldn't function or think straight. I was upset.
Right.
But everyone else was going on about their day, unaffected by it.
And you're sort of like, am I crazy?
I mean, that was the moment it all changed for me, experiencing that, you know, at an art space amongst other artists and realizing, again, like, people don't carry that type of weight, right? This is the difference between blackness and whiteness in America.
I also think a lot of people are rewarded for not carrying that weight.
Well, I painted a fresco that day with their names on it and put it up in the barn.
Right,
because
exactly.
that was the only way for me to exercise that angst out of me. And I want to talk about what this was like walking through the exhibition by reading another excerpt of Baldwin for you and then asking you a question about this. So for all of you with this text, here's another excerpt here. Try to imagine how you would feel if you woke up one morning to find the sun shining and all the stars aflame. You would be frightened because it is out of the order of nature. Any upheaval in the universe is terrifying because it is so profoundly attacks one's sense of one's own reality. Well, the black man has functioned in the white man's world as a fixed star, as an immovable pillar. And as he moves out of his place, heaven and earth are shaken to their foundations. You don't be afraid. I said that it was intended that you should perish in the ghetto, perish by never being allowed to go behind the white man's definitions, by never being allowed to spell your proper name. You have, and many of us have, defeated this intention. And by a terrible law, a terrible paradox, those innocents who believe that your imprisonment made them safe are losing their grasp of reality. But these men are your brothers, your lost younger brothers. And if the word integration means anything, this is what it means: that we, with love, shall force our brothers to see themselves as they are,
Right.
to cease fleeing from reality and begin to change it. For this is your home, my friend. Do not be driven from it. Great men have done great things here and will again, and we can make America what America must be. So I thought about that passage and looking at this piece. And I wanted to ask and think about how you frame the entrance, and this is the entrance here, how you frame the entrance and exhibition with artwork, a partial list of unarmed African Americans who were killed by police or who died in police custody during my sabbatical from Massachusetts College of Art and Design 2014 to 2015. Feels as though these names are written in a moonlit, star-filled night sky due to the blue neon light cascading from above these tall columns of slain, beautiful Black brothers, sisters, beloved family members, human beings. I couldn't help but notice how your name appears adjacent to all their names on the doors that viewers must push through to enter, to witness your show, to be affected by your show. Reflecting on Baldwin's words, are you yourself taking a brave stance, taking a position of courage, like a poet or a prophet, to reveal the white supremacist sympathizer to himself, to herself, to his or her barbaric nature, to the destruction and the genocide of their own humanity, to make America what America must become? And do you ever fear that there will be repercussions and consequences for you due to your awareness of the truth about whiteness in America?
You know, I knew you were going to ask me this question, and I just, I could have had a different life, right? And we've talked about this before, that you will be handsomely rewarded by a white art world for making a certain kind of work. Yeah. I could not make that work. And I also know, as much as I know anything, that there's no difference among people. Like, people aren't better than other people. You know that feeling when you get dressed up and you look really good, you feel like you're better than everyone else? You're not. It's just a feeling, right? People have built a whole society on that feeling, and it's insane. And what do you know in America what white people have to do to themselves? The shape that they have to fold themselves into in order to live as white people. And all whiteness means is that you're better than people who aren't white. That's all it means. It's not about culture. It's not about family. It's not about anything. There are white people in my family, right? You know what I mean? And when people say oh, I'm mixed race, it's yeah, I am too. Almost every Black person who is the descendant of enslaved people is mixed race. So you're saying that you're better than me because you know the white people that you're related to? That doesn't make any sense to me. So this notion that somehow we're different or we're ranked or whatever, it's completely insane. And Black people know it's crazy. White people think it's normal. And so they do these crazy things in order to preserve this mythology of whiteness. They kill their own children. It's just incredible to me that people want to hold on to this mythology more than they want to hold on to their humanity, right? And I share that with Baldwin. And I got to tell you, LaToya, I know I'm not going to make any friends. I'm fine with that. I'm completely fine with that. I have a sister who loves me. I have a wonderful gallerist who supports me. I'm 61, right? I just got a gallerist, right? So yeah, I have paid for the work. If I could have done something different, I would have, but I could not. Because I got off a plane coming back from London, and Eric Garner was being murdered on television over and over and over again. And I thought, if I were coming from another planet or another country, and I saw that on television, I'd have a very clear understanding of what was what in this country, right? That's where we live. I didn't make that up. That is where we live, right? And so my job as an artist, like Baldwin says, if I love you, I have to tell you the truth. I love you. This is what it is, right? I wish it was different. I don't have the power to do some sort of magical image that makes you feel better about it. Because I don't think you should feel better about it. You know, I think you should feel the way I feel, right? And like the names on that list, and this piece is like sort of historic because it was the beginning of that sort of the quote unquote Black Lives Matter moment.
Yeah, and they
Right.
say her name and
Right.
listing
And Freddie
names.
Gray is on that list, and Rekia Boyd and Sandra Bland, and like all these people who became hashtags, right? And the reason my name is on the door is just a matter of luck. There's no reason that I shouldn't be on the other side of that wall. There's no reason. It's just a matter of dumb luck, right? And so having that, and I didn't put that image of the neon. I painted the wall this Benjamin Moore wolf gray is the color.
Oh, it's one of my favorite colors.
It's really beautiful. It's
Yes.
really beautiful. And I tested all these different colors under the neon. And the people who fabricated the sign were so lovely putting up with me looking at color over and over again. Because I wanted it to look like you were walking down the street at night and the police light sort of illuminating you suddenly.
Okay.
And so you're looking at a monument, essentially a memorial to all these people without making an image of them. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. And also the other thing is this wolf gray is painted all the way around the exhibition as like a perimeter, as a way to bring all those
the
people.
question I asked you
Yeah.
later about how you're grounding all the artworks.
'Cause I wanted
so
to
that's the
bring-
one that's like right there, 3
Yeah, it's
feet
about
up
3 inches
above.
from the wall, from the
Yep.
ground. It was a way to bring all those people into, hi, do we only have 10 minutes left? Are you serious? Oh my God, we didn't even get through the slides.
All right, well, let's keep going.
Oh my God, you guys, I'm so sorry. Oh, there it is. Yeah, that's the image. Yeah. And you can see the gray line. Right. Okay. All right. So Flance's family, right?
So this piece came out of the commission with Elle to cover the water crisis. So I pivoted from 3 generations of women in a still town to 3 generations of women in Vehicle City. Flint, Michigan is called Vehicle City. It is the home for General Motors, another company. And one of the things, how many of you heard about the Flint water crisis in the U.S.?
Yeah, everyone.
Okay, so did you perhaps make the connection that not only was it about the lead contaminated water that was being created through them not having the right chemicals coating the pipes, but also the fact that General Motors dumped tons and tons and tons of pollutants and chemicals in the Flint River. So it wasn't simply about the lead pipes.
Right.
So it is, again, this slow violence that I've been talking about, in addition to spatial and structural racism against Black bodies, and in particular Black working class bodies in my work that I'm very clear about. Additionally, it wasn't the lead or General Motors pollutants. It was also the fact that due to them overcorrecting it, there was an outbreak of Legionella bacteria. How many people heard about that part that was killing people? And how many people did they tell you it killed? Does anyone remember the number, the count that the media gave us? They told us 12.
Right.
That wasn't true. It was way more than that. So there was just as many, about 8,000 children were affected due to the lead contamination, where it impacts their emotional, cognitive ability. It was proved by the American Pediatrics Association that many of them wouldn't graduate high school. They have since gone on to show that and prove that because enough time has passed.
Right.
But they did all of this, right? Lying about the Legionella bacteria, lying about the other outbreaks from too much chlorine. All of this they did because they wanted to take away their relationship with the Detroit water supply
Right.
out of Lake Huron. They did all of this to justify the KWA pipeline. Did people know about the pipeline? Now, see, that's what's interesting to me. And this is why I make my work, because I like connecting the dots. This was about killing children and adults in a predominantly Black working class area to justify a pipeline so that shareholders could make a profit.
Right.
That's what this was all about. Additionally, they had Nestle, the water company. They gave them for free access to Lake Michigan, to Lake Huron, where they were pumping 400 of gallons of water per minute out of aquifers in Lake Michigan for free, while the people in Flint had to pay for contaminated water.
Yeah.
And on top of it, the highest water bills in this country. Remember, when they were trying to go to the water pods, people were afraid because you were met by law enforcement who wanted your ID. So if you had a warrant out for your arrest, they arrested you. They were met by the military. The Army in particular was standing guard at those sites as well. So people who were afraid because maybe they didn't have a license or a passport and weren't considered citizens couldn't go. So all of these things are what's happening. And the most egregious thing to me was that they voted. The people in Flint voted not to have the water switched. They were happy with paying the high bills they paid for the water supply through Detroit because they knew that the Flint River was contaminated and dangerous.
Right.
So it was Governor Rick Snyder and his administration that vetoed their Democratic vote not to switch. So we're talking about a government that is revoking citizens, tax-paying citizens' vote not to switch. So this is really a story about denying people's democracy and using state-sanctioned murder to justify a profitable pipeline. Like, that's actually what happened. And it is still happening. The water crisis is not over in Flint.
It's not.
They never changed the pipes the way that they were supposed to. The settlement that the people were given, they had to write all of these applications to justify getting access to what would become pennies on the dollar for what they actually went through. So Amber and Shay, the two mothers I worked with, didn't even take the settlement money. Most of it was given to the private schools.
Right.
So this is how they, again, continue. So imagine the history of that town, and Shay and Amber are descendants of auto workers, Black working class people who migrated there to work for General Motors, to buy their homes, to be able to have generational wealth, who suddenly want white collar jobs and to be more present in their labor unions. And what happens? Our government allows General Motors to leave the country, right? To take those jobs. And this is why they did that. And this was the same with the United States Steel Corporation in Braddock, Pennsylvania. Same narrative. That destruction of what they did for that pipeline devalued all of their property in their historically Black neighborhood. On top of it, they also didn't show you that there were multi-million-dollar cul-de-sacs with million-dollar homes all around Flint. Flint is not a poor Black city at all. They lied. So this is why someone like me shows up in disguise of a 5-month photo essay for Elle Magazine and Hearst Corporation.
I love that.
And instead turns it into a 5-year body of work where I'm not just raising awareness or taking pictures and telling a story. I'm literally, and you can go to the next slide, using the images, and you can go to the next one if I have any of those. Go to the next one if there's any. Using these images as fundraiser prints, using them as the platform to generate the resources to then take it a step further, right? I'm taking it further than fighting racism and all the things that people say Gordon Parks hated about America, right? He was able to use his camera as a weapon in the 20th century, which allowed me to use my photographs as a platform for social justice and cultural change in the 21st century. Right? I'm not repeating what he and Dorothea Lange did at all. I'm actually standing on the photographs as the platform as well as the resource. So this is literally artists and activists creating something from nothing to then go and get the justice. I always believed that Amber and Shay had the answer.
Right.
No one cared because they were Black working class women, right? So when the three of us showed up with a 25,000 pound atmospheric water generator, they didn't want to interview us and ask us how we did it. And I think I have it in there. This one, that's the no filter. So this is Moses West, the ranger who was retired, the Army Ranger officer who retired, who invented this technology. I went all the way to Fort Sam Houston in Texas to visit him. And Amber met him in Vieques, Puerto Rico, when Hurricane Maria hit and wiped out all their electricity. He was using this exact machine in Puerto Rico, in Vieques, to give them water and use net zero to give the building electricity. When she saw him, she said, "You have to bring this technology to Flint." Here's the crazy part. When he finally makes it to Flint, he offers it. He's so overcome with emotion because he did not know that Black Americans were living like this while he's off fighting all the wars for this country.
Right.
He says, "I will give you the technology for free." They turned him away.
Right.
They laughed at him and said no. And what made it even worse, remember the emergency manager that took the fall for Rick Snyder, he was Black. The people who laughed at Moses West are all Black local elected officials in the city of Flint. This is how far we've come with racial capitalism in America. Now they put Black people in those positions to do the dirty work. Right? That's how far and how pernicious this really is and how manipulative this is. So at that point, I decided it wasn't about documenting, photograph, storytelling. Amber called me and told me they turned him away. And I knew, get me on the phone with Moses. We started a water operation ourselves. The city didn't want us there and want us to bring it. So the land that it's on, we created a group called the Sister Tour, Amber and Shay did, based on our friendship and sisterhood. That man right there at the end next to Amber, Tuclore, that is his mother's property. It is where her beautician school and hair salon was. It's where he grew up. He calls this area the Black Wall Street of Flint. So in order for us to get this technology on the ground all the way from Fort Sam Houston, we had to put it on his family's plot of land because they would have seized it from us. They did things, they tried to intimidate us the entire time. They had those sirens there that they would turn up really loud to the point that it really makes you nauseous and you can't function. They did that. They sent people from the electric company, law enforcement. Someone came and attacked the machine in the middle of the night. They did all of these things to deter us from carrying out this water operation. And this is the kind of thing that we're up against, especially in our beloved industrial heartland of America. I mean, you're from Detroit, so I know that this story meant everything to you, and me being from Braddock.
You're also the only person I know outside of Michigan who knows that story. And the thing, this is the thing, you're a photographer, right? And so the notion of the neutral documentarian, that sort of nonsense.
Yeah, no such thing.
That's over, right?
I'm probably the most unethical photographer, American photographer to exist.
But yes. I think that this idea, that ethics somehow has been equated with amorality. And this notion that you see someone choking to death, but it's your job to take pictures, right? You see people dying of a preventable illness, right? From a preventable cause, from a choice. It wasn't because it wasn't because of anything other than greed, right?
Yeah.
And you're the photographer who is now creating the circumstances for people to save themselves.
That's right.
Right. Paul is telling me we have to stop, and I'm we have 300 slides to get through.
But we have to stop so that they could ask questions, and then we could show more slides answering the questions.
Okay.
Oh, we can do that.
We can do that. Okay.
We can totally do that.
But before we go, I love you. I do. I love you. Right.
Well, I love you too. I mean, thank
You're
you
just
for
saying
doing
it because
this
I said
work.
it. You know, you're trapped. You have to say it now.
So thank you for that. It was it went by fast.
It really did.
For us, yeah. So I think it would be great if you could continue to show slides, even if the questions are, because they're
Sure.
it's amazing to see the work. Questions?
Yeah, I was there for 5 years. In this moment when I took this image, that was the first time I'd ever seen Amber and Shay and their kids happily playing in water. It didn't occur to me until that moment.
Yeah.
So I had to switch hats from being an activist and a mentor and helping them to suddenly loading up the camera with color film to document that moment. And even when I went to take the picture, I was overcome with so many complex emotions because a part of me kept looking over my shoulder in fear, wanting to protect them and make sure no one was trying to attack us.
Right.
And then there was the other part where I was just like, this is poetic justice and incredible. And I wanted to be joyful in the moment with them. And like this constant, the way that we are trying not to internalize and trying to be present and
Right.
trying not to be held back by the past, but knowing that these are crimes against humanity,
Right.
knowing we want justice so much so that we use our work to bring that justice
Right.
forward.
Right.
How do you keep the energy and the stamina to do that, especially in Killers? Like when I was looking at Killers walking around Steve's show, I could not believe, like, think about this. He's staring at images from courtroom surveillance footage, from social media, and from mass media coverage of these killings. So in my mind, when I'm looking at these drawings, I'm thinking, wow, you really have to look past all of these, again, technological lynchings, seeing us killed over and over, and concentrate on carefully, lovingly, meticulously, creatively making their portrait out of graphite. Like, these are people who would kill you on sight,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, absolutely.
So I was trying to imagine you in your studio doing that, right? Intently looking at the details of Dylan Roof's face and Officer Chauvin's face and Patello's face, like looking at them and drawing them. How did you keep those oversaturated, mediated, violent images out of your mind as you tried to concentrate on drawing them? And what does it mean for you to creatively humanize their portrait through using your creative energy to do so?
I feel super lucky that I was trained as a portrait painter. Like that's the core of my training is portraiture, right? And so when you're a portrait painter, when you look at people sometimes, their head, you see through their skull. It's not a pretty way to look at someone. Anyone who's ever sat for a painter and the way they look at you, it's not a pretty way to be looked at. And it's horrible when I'm at dinner with someone and I can't turn it off. But because of that training, I had to rely on that training in order to get through the drawing. I cried a lot. I cried a lot because it would be so easy, LaToya, to make them monsters. That would be so easy, right? But it's not an easy thing. Like Dylan Roof, he was a beautiful kid. Like, look at him, he's beautiful. That's someone's baby. Right. He murdered 9 people. Like, let's have both of those things at the same time, right? And it's a hard project, it's not done. There's 63 drawings, I'm trying to get to 100. I'm trying to draw the cops who killed Breonna Taylor, and I can't do it. I just can't do it. It's very, very hard, because some of those people are Black. Like the cops who killed Freddie Gray, some of them are Black, so it's hard, but it needs to be done. But some people have questions, so I don't want to. Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Oh, there you are.
My name's Asia. I'm a art student at Concordia, and my practice is also in photography. And I just wanted to know, for both of you, but more for you, LaToya, because you also do photography. In the beginning of your career, were you ever concerned with the fact that, like, it is important to create documentation of Black people, but that even in the art world, it's not a safe space for depictions of Black people? You're giving up so much to an audience that doesn't really have the information to get like to the root of like the people in the pictures, and you do a lot to like assert the person in the image, like their eye contact and their awareness of your presence. But once you put the image out there, you don't know how people are going to perceive it. So were you ever struggling with that, or do you still struggle with that, or?
Well, you know, that came up a lot in grad school. They would always ask you in crit seminar, who is your audience? All right. We know, like, by default, it's white. So there are levels of being able to enter into the space. So I knew at each level, from undergrad to grad school, from having group shows to solo shows to museum shows, that I was finding all of these entry points to set people up for the big TKO, which is, although I know that these are predominantly elite white institutional spaces, the reason that I showed up and the reason that I'm here is to keep the door open and a revolving door for all of the working Americans that don't even know that these are free public institutions that they have a right to come into to look at art, that don't even realize that they have a right to demand to see works of art that do reflect them, that may not be aware that you can walk into a museum and ask to have works pulled from a permanent collection, especially in the photo department at all of those institutions in New York. So I already knew that I was going in there with a purpose and a mission. And that ultimate goal, even though I was trained in school that my audience was white, my goal, and I was able to do this at MoMA, was to bring together everyday Americans, working class Americans, as well as the art world, to actually unite them, to do the thing that they can't seem to do for themselves, but for the betterment of Americans' relationships to art and art making and who it's for. So I'm at the point now where wherever my work shows up and it's on view, the people that are in the work are the ones that are predominantly at the opening.
Right.
They're the ones who are at the dinners. I actually design my shows, and I'm about to do it next week. The Community Health Workers of Baltimore, Maryland, well, we have our own private opening on the 8th and the 9th for all of those workers and their families and their friends from Baltimore. They have their own reception without the elite art world. And then all of my programming for the exhibitions, the people who are in the programs are the people who are in the work.
Right.
So I took my time and went through everything that I jumped through, all the hoops I had to jump through to get to this moment. So when I look out into the audiences in the US where my work is and when I'm speaking, I see people from little babies all the way to 90-something years old. It's intergenerational, it's multiracial. You've got affluent, wealthy people sitting next to people who are working people. Like, I really believe in that. And so the extension of the work is all of that programming and all of the community and camaraderie that comes around the work. So you have to kind of run your race. Right? You've got to run the long race to keep on staying graceful, astute, and calm, and just keep chipping away at it until you get to that mountaintop. And for me, that was, of course, getting to the MoMA show where, and you got to experience it. It's 9 rooms. It's 10,000 square feet. Every single room, what starts to happen is the photographs, once you see the notion of family, see, you think it's traditional social documentary portraiture.
No.
Then you hit that second room and you're like, oh my God, the photographs are coming off the wall. They're standing on stands. They're starting to surround us, right? Because I'm starting to say, you are a part of this, right? That exhibition is really teaching people civic engagement, what democracy should look like. And the ultimate thing that it does to get to the heart of your question, all of the text that you see in that show is by the people who are depicted in the images. I've gotten that far with demanding that institutions, I don't need your chat label. I don't need to hear from the historian and the curator. The text is now designed and integrated into the work where you can't pull it apart. What they have to say is equally important to the depiction that you want to consume of their body. What they have to say, so you have to deal with their words. And then who do you see standing there? The woman depicted in the photograph, Letitia Walker, who's schooling all these Johns Hopkins interns about their racism and their implicit bias as she's walking them through East Baltimore to show them the demarcation line between Hopkins and her neighborhood on a 93-degree day where we don't have water, and she's making them feel what it feels like to have to walk from their community to Hopkins to get to a doctor's appointment. And if you're late, they cancel it, but they don't realize how hard it is to walk through all of that to get there in the first place. She's standing there at the opening in New York City at Gladstone Gallery in front of her work, engaging with people. So it's gotten that serious for me, where even the gallery, if you're gonna show my work, you're gonna bring the people to the opening, they're gonna be at the dinner, they're gonna be at the reception, they're gonna engage with the folks there so that we can bring real cultural change. And so at that reception, we had dinner. All these CHWs kept getting up one at a time, testifying about what it meant for them to see themselves at the museum and in New York and to be brought and invited there. And all of those people were crying, right? All those influential historians and curators they were sitting in there crying because they'd never experienced an artwork speak back to them. And that's the obsession. But, it was a 25-year trajectory for me. But in all my books, I wrote down how I did it so you could get there faster than it took me.
Right.
Mary.
Thank you so much to both of you for this really powerful, painful, and important talk. I wanted to go back to something you said, Steve, if I can, in relation to LaToya's work and its contrast to the migrant mother, which was so interesting that it's actually that photograph, too, that I read Barth and I learned about the punctum and all that. So I don't know if that's something you're just supposed to do in Photography 101, but you talked about that image as being very consumable versus the image of you and your mother and grandmother having this kind of distance, which made me think about protection and the way that it might be inscribed or kind of built in within your work. So I guess I just wanted to ask if that's something that you actively think about, because when I looked at some of these works, they're so striking and strong, but also, particularly I'm thinking of the little girl writing on her bed, feels kind of protected. And I wonder if that's something that you think about.
Yeah, in that image, exactly, you're spot on with it. You see that Shay is at the edge. First of all, that portrait is my obsession with Vermeer. I love painting. A lot of people don't know that, but I study painting and love painting, and Vermeer is one of my go-tos, because how do you challenge yourself to keep making a depiction of a woman with a still life next to a window for 30-something years? So that was the task of me and my mother and my grandmother as well. How do we keep making these little bedrooms interesting? And how do we keep talking about domesticity in an interesting way for the viewer? And so in this image, it is part homage to Vermeer and homage to Gordon Parks, because in Gordon's work, which that whole Flint essay is a tribute to him and his collaboration with Ralph Ellison that was never published in 1948, and that they end up making part of it for Invisible Man in the 60s. But in those images that he made in 1968 for Life magazine, I believe it was about the Fontenelle family. And the images in that I noticed what Gordon was doing with all of his work, there was always a child studying, reading a book. Self-determination was very clear. And I took it a step further, right? Because I'm showing you, moving your eye from the left edge all the way to the right. You see my reference to Vermeer with the glass jug with alkaline water, the plastic bottle that is also contaminated water, Zion trying to study. Again, when lead goes into a child's body, it leaches onto their brain first. So again, the way it impacts them emotionally and cognitively is serious. But then what do you see to that edge? See, for me, what's at the edge of my photographs are just as important as to what's at the center or what you think the focal point is. So that care that you sense is that I am intentionally having Shay at that edge protecting and watching her daughter, right? It's about care, mutual aid, consent, camaraderie, making an actual declaration and a statement. Like, you think that we don't know what you're doing? And it's interesting, a passage, and I was listening to the book again, Baldwin was saying what white people don't know about Black people, it means that that's what they don't know about themselves.
Right. I want to go back to what Asia, correct? And your question as well. Black people are fine. Like, no one cares. Like, there's no way to protect us. Like, this notion that, like, somehow the image is going to protect, you're going to do something to an image and somehow that's going to protect someone. That child has no protection. It's a photograph. And I think that understanding that, like, there's the images that artists make about Blackness, which only function to affirm white supremacy. A lot of these paintings of Black people, of Black figures, are the only Black people that white collectors are going to have in their home, right? That's what that's about. So, like, appealing to that audience is a fool's errand, because at some point there's always going to be someone Blacker, someone more authentic, someone more street, someone more this than you, and then that work will get deaccessioned and the next one will come in, and they will be cranking out Black MFAs to feed that machine. The United States loves everything about Black culture except actual Black people. Black people who immigrate to the United States are taught to have no respect for the Black people who live there. So trying to appeal is a fool's errand. All you can do is make your work. That's all you can do. And if the world wants your work, it will come for your work. But if it doesn't, what are you going to do? You have to make your work anyway. I've been working as an artist for almost 40 years, right? No one paid attention to my work for years. Did that mean I stopped making it? No. I don't care what anybody thinks. I don't care. I don't care. I didn't have a plan B. This was the only thing I knew to be. And I knew that I would work my entire life. No one would see my work. I would die, and some graduate student would see it at some point, and then I would have a career, right? I knew and that was fine. Like Giacometti said, I'm not making paintings for now. Giacometti's not thinking about his contemporaries. He's on some other shit, he's on some other stuff. He's thinking about, like, way beyond. Like, you think Matisse is thinking about anybody? The only person Matisse is thinking about is Picasso. That's the only person he's thinking about. And he's like, this is gonna piss the Spaniard off. That's all he's thinking, right? That's all he's thinking, right? And so this whole idea that the reception of the work or the audience for the work, those people are fickle. People looked at LaToya's work for years, thinking that it was about the poor, sick girl from Pennsylvania. People tried to make her that, right? And she never entertained that. Other critics did. People wrote extensively about her work from that framework, right? People want to write about my work like it's about my identity. You notice you never hear anyone say to a white artist, what does your work tell us about being white? No one ever says that. But somehow I'm supposed to perform my Blackness for people. I'm supposed to explain Blackness to you. Black people have been on this continent for 300 years. We are not alien to people. White people want to pretend that we're different. Tell us about your culture. It's so interesting. So interesting. You have a world because of Black people. There is no United States culture without Black people. That's the simple thing. For people to pretend like somehow it's outside of their understanding or it's outside of their reference is completely insane. And if you read Another Country, which is the James Baldwin book, that is the book that is about, that man knows everything about what it is to be an American. And he writes about it from every single conceivable point of view. What it's like to be a gay American, a Black woman, a Jewish woman, a married couple, an expatriate. He goes into every single permutation of the human experience. The Afro-Roman poet Terence, I am human and nothing human is alien to me, right? Yeah.
And I would also like to add on to what Steve is also saying. Yeah, I'm not worried about audience either, or the white audience and what their expectation is. But what I am preoccupied with is a redistribution of wealth. It's what I do with the photograph behind the scenes that the art world doesn't address or touch or come near. So not only am I looking at the history of photography and painting and documenting this crisis and showing the power and the care and the mutual aid between the three of us, me, Shay, and Zion. First of all, Zion was 8 when I met her. I was 8 in Braddock, Pennsylvania, when our water was contaminated and had a bacteria outbreak. Our lead levels were far higher than what was in Flint, Michigan. So when I arrived at Flint and I met Zion, I looked at her and I just knew it, that she was spiritually assigned to me. What I couldn't do for myself at 8 in Braddock, Pennsylvania, with my grandma going through the same thing, I knew I could show up and do for Zion.
Right.
So I kept quietly making the portraits of her and waited for the opportunity to present itself. It was at SF MoMA, NGG's exhibition, Soft Power. I did an edit from Act 2. There are 3 acts, of which not one media outlet published from Acts 2 or 3 because of the truth it revealed and the power it instilled in people as they realized, you mean we can control our own water? Yeah. And I teach you how to do it in Flint Act 2 and 3 with them. So Angie invited me to the board meeting at the end of the year, you know, how to talk about their fiscal year and the money. So she has me come to their luncheon. The work is on view in the exhibition. She brings me in the middle of their lunch. I get to join it. And then I stand up before them and I say, I know you're thinking about perhaps collecting one photograph from it, but I want you to rethink this. I want you to reconsider this. Over 8,000 children had their lives impacted. I don't know how many Elon Musk and how many celebrities talked about they were going to help people in Flint. I'm one average American who was thinking about one kid and saying to myself, man, imagine all the millionaires and billionaires. If they sponsored one kid, we could have already prolonged their life and opportunity. And I wanted to hold myself accountable to use these photographs to make a difference and an opportunity for Zion. So when I stood up, I said, I need you to collect the entire series that is on view. And I need you to collect it and acquire it and bring it into this institution because those proceeds will go into a 529 plan so that some of Zion's college education could be covered. Because if it was left up to Rick Snyder and their administration, these kids will not make it to college, right? And so for me, I'm not preoccupied with what folks have to say about my work at all. They're entitled to their opinion. The work that I'm doing is redistributing wealth through these institutions. Like, I get what you're saying about not worrying about audience, but I also feel like in order for the next generation to feel like they can make the work and just naturally be and be who they are and not be preoccupied with this or have to answer questions like this, folks like us have to actually change the way that these things function and the culture around them and who is looking or how we're holding people who are looking accountable. And all of my work, I'm taking all of your emotional energy. If you're staring at the work and engaging with it, I'm asking something of you. I don't care what your race and sexuality and gender is. You have to give something to even engage with the work and the practice in the first place. So using those opportunities, once I get inside of those ivory towers, to address them, to put it on their mind, to redistribute that money back out into these communities where I'm on the ground locally and grassroots level engaging with folks is a necessity, and it is part of the practice. But you're only going to hear it here in the context of this conversation because they don't want to acknowledge that part because it's supposed to be art washing and collecting for the wealthy. But I'm saying in all of my work, when they support it, it allows me to really go out there and use those resources for real advocacy, efficacy, and change.
But that's
And
because
so-
you have a maintainer relationship with all the communities you photograph.
Yes.
That's the thing.
But that's part of the practice. And I'm trying to make sure that folks who are coming next know that that is a viable practice. You don't have to sit there and regurgitate those European masters. Like the next kid that comes behind me in documentary won't have to sit there and talk about let us now praise famous men and James Agee and Walker Evans and all that. They can move on to the next thing. They can actually see themselves when they get in that first photo class, that first art history class. So I do take it upon myself to try to push that forward, thinking about people. Like sometimes I think that my work is made for people who have not been born yet.
Yeah.
And this is another reason why I sleep well at night and let folks say whatever they want, because I feel like perhaps that's what being a documentarian is about, or someone who dares to document their moment that we're in creatively, that the works are for people who aren't born yet.
Right. Sometimes people can't see what is important in a work until long after the artist is gone. You know, and I think that we hear a lot about social practice and all this sort of stuff and working with community and stuff like that. A lot of it is nonsense. Let's be honest, a lot of it is nonsense. It's very hard to be an actor, but it's easy to be a performance artist. Yeah, I said it. But I think that there's a way in which, if you're going to talk about being a social documentarian, right, in 2024, what does that mean? All the other arts have changed over the course of time. This notion that social documentary lives with like Jakob Riis and how the other half lived, no, maybe the social documentarian is the person involved in society. Maybe that's what the social documentarian is. And that's what your work posits. It moves not just the work forward, it moves the practice of how we talk about that work forward. Paul is looking at me.
I'm so sorry, we're about to run out of time. I was wondering if we could maybe ask for one last question from the audience. I see someone over here.
I want the person with the baby to ask a question.
It'll help.
Who has the baby? That's what I want to know. She okay? Okay, good. Thank you for bringing the baby.
My question has to do with the fact that you've contextualized both of your works using a lot of Baldwin's texts. Now, is your way of perhaps conceiving of your work without those texts, underpinning the images?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think if you walked into a room and saw a 22 by 30 sheet of white paper in a white frame on a white wall with a white man who murdered 9 people in it, I think you might feel some kind of way about that. And I don't, I'm not, like I said, I'm not a narrative artist, I'm not an illustrator, so the work stands on its own. The work lives as a, let me just go to this one painting here. Yeah, this is very clear if you know who that person is, right? It's very clear what's at stake in that image. But when you get to a painting like this, come on now, there we go. This is The Wealth of Nations, right? It's sort of like a history of painting in one object, right? And it doesn't really depend upon the text. It depends upon the objects and their arrangement. And so this idea that something has a front and a back, it's the idea of a signage. The history of painting is the history of signs, right? And so this idea that this might be some sort of sign warning you about something, and that object is a bank. And so this is about abstraction. Yeah, she likes that painting. Yeah. She's terrified of this, like any thinking person would be. But how can you, this is the thing about being from the United States. How can you look at this and think that has some relationship to an actual person? That's abstraction. So when we're talking about American abstraction, it starts with this. It starts with minstrelsy and the man that Black people perform for white people. And that's what the wealth of this country is built on. It's built on the auction block. It's built on slavery. It's built on the performance of Black people, right? And so, like, when we talk about wealth, when we talk about the redistribution of wealth, I admire that impulse in you, right, to give back to the community with whom you work, right? I work alone, right? And because of the nature of the work I do, I have to be alone. I wouldn't want to subject anybody else to what I have to think about in order to make the work that I make, right? And so the ideas about community, about connection and stuff like that, I'm thinking more about communication. I'm thinking about making an object that lives in the world with you that changes the way you move through the world. And so Baldwin is a catalyst, right? But it's not a requirement to have read Baldwin to get the understanding of the work, right? You can even just know the song, God gave Noah the rainbow sign, no more water, the fire next time. Like that's a very well-known spiritual song about like retribution, right? So even if you just know the context of the song, you know that the show is about a coming retribution.
I have the thankless task of thanking you and ending this amazing conversation.
We're gonna go to, we're all go to Lillian's house. Come on, let's go, come on. Keep the party going.
I just want to remind you that there's a collection of texts by James Baldwin and the notion of family out on the table there to purchase if you're interested. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, LaToya. Unbelievable talk.
Thank you, my dear.
Lillian.
Thank you.